Oh my god. Oh my god. I feel like London is not meant for people like me. London is not for me, to be honest. So in today's video, I decided that I'll talk about a very controversial issue. Is renting a waste of money, particularly if you're someone who is staying in London? Should you consider getting a mortgage? And this is from the perspective of someone who is single. So I know there are so many immigrants in this country. Where I work personally, there are so many people who came from other countries. So the demographics of my channel, it's mostly viewers between the ages of 25 and 39. So I think this video may be applicable and it may help them to also look at things in a different light that they had not maybe considered. And before I do go into the details of this video, I need to make this disclaimer. I am not a certified financial advisor. If you need specific financial advice for your own circumstances, please reach out to someone who is licensed to do so. This is purely educational entertainment, so I'd say take it with a grain of salt. This is not the holy grail or what you should do. This is just specific to my own circumstances and situation, if someone may be in a particular or similar situation as well. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. I've structured the video in such a way that I'll talk about the option of buying and then the option of renting. And then lastly, I'll talk about the financial things that I've considered for me to actually reach the conclusion that I have reached. So looking at the first option, which is buying a house. Having a house is a very good long-term investment. You do not want to be paying for rent in your retirement age. Maybe now you're old, you're still renting. I think that's not a good financial situation to be in. And even if you decide, if you're an immigrant, if you decide to leave this country, you know that you always have income coming in from a rentals, which you can even live off on in another country as well. I have so many friends, I have so many cousins who have bought properties themselves who are even my age, and I think that's a very impressive and a very big achievement for someone to make. Coming on to the next point is when you own your own house, you have this sense of security that comes on you. You are not worried that someone will just maybe sell the house and then say you need to move, because it's your house. You make your own decisions. It just gives you that sense of comfort and peace of mind when you know that you have a house that you call your own. And the third point, when you are owning your own house, you can make alterations and house improvements to the house that you're living in based on what you actually want. You can choose to paint the walls yellow today, tomorrow red, but which is something that someone may not always be able to do. And any house improvements that you make to the property, you know that you're increasing the value of your own house. You cannot simply do this on a rental property, because sometimes you may not always be able to recover the cost of it, adding value to someone else's house. And some landlords may not even want you to change the state that the house is in. Now onto the disadvantages of having or buying a home. Now when it comes to owning your property, it really requires a very large upfront investment. It's not just the deposit that you need. There's so many expenses that will come with that particular purchase, and because it's one of the largest purchases that you have in your lifetime, you definitely want to do it the right way. So some costs you may not always be able to cut corners. You definitely need to incur some costs, could be like legal costs that are also added onto it, transfer fees in addition to the deposit. So it's not just the 10% or the 20% down payment that you need. And in a country like England, or specifically in London, property houses are very expensive. The least you can get for a decent property that you do not need to do any fixing is £300,000. A 10% deposit of £30,000 is not a joke. It's not easy to raise upfront and just have that injection all at once. And the next thing, or the next disadvantage that comes with owning your own house, is if there are any changes that need to be done to the property, or if there are any major repairs or even the small repairs that need to be done, they're definitely your responsibility. You can't call anyone and say the washing machine is dead. If it needs replacement, it means that you are the one who needs to take care of that. Now moving on to the other option, which is the rental option, which I am currently on because I do not have money to afford a house. The first advantage, or the first pro for me, is it allows me me to be very mobile. It allows for so much flexibility. If I decide today that I do not want to stay in London, I can just pick up my bags and give my landlord a notice and say, you know what, in the next maybe 1 month I'll be leaving. Maybe I may need to pay some penalty fees for me to cancel a list, but that's not as bad. You can't just get out of a mortgage. You need to make sure that you are stable, you know where you want to be in the next 5 years. Whereas personally, at this point in time, I'm going through my own millennial life crisis where I don't really know what I want to do, which is something that we'll talk about in another video or another day. But all I'm saying is I'm not tied down to an area. I'm not tied down to this city to say I need to stay in London because I don't have a mortgage here. I can always move around and go to another place. And the next point that I love about renting is I know that my budget on what I need to spend every month is fixed. So there are no surprises on how much money I need to pay on my rent. I know that if there are any expenses or any maintenance things that may come up, I'll just call my landlord and say, this needs replacement, please come and fix it. Sometimes some repairs may not be done as fast as I wish they would, but I don't need to incur any cost. And for me, I'm very much patient. I'm very much willing to wait at zero cost to me until the landlord comes and fixes whatever needs fixing. The next point is, if I had chosen to live in a better area, maybe let's say closer to Central, I could somehow afford to do so whilst I'm renting. Rather than buying a property close to Central, it would be almost impossible for me to be able to do so. So renting allows you that flexibility to decide that you want to stay in a certain area for a certain period, which you will not always be able to afford living in that particular area if you're buying the house. Now onto the disadvantages of renting a property. I do not have any say in what the rental amount is going to be. At the end of the year, it may be adjusted for inflation, it may be increased by my landlord. If I really love the place, I do not have an option, but I'll need to pay. And which is somehow also attached to your point that you cannot know what may happen tomorrow. The landlord may even sell the house and I'll probably need to figure out a way, look for a place to live. So there's just that some form of uncertainty. And then the next point is, it's a little bit hard to hope from one place to the other. If maybe my lease ends, I may decide that I need to find another place. And those moving costs, for some people, they may be a little bit too much, or it may just get boring to know that after every year or after every 2 years, you're moving, you're picking up again, repacking, unpacking. So some people may not like it. Some people may find it as fun because you get to explore new places. Onto the financial considerations that you will need to make. And now I'm going to talk about how I've evaluated the two options, the buying and the renting decision, and based on the numbers. So let's just quickly have a look. I came across an article from a portfolio manager by the name Ben Felix. I'll leave a link below, who introduced some very good concepts and some very insightful ways to look at this whole decision. So the first concept that I found about was, we need to talk about unrecoverable costs when evaluating this decision. So unrecoverable costs which are not associated with any residual value. So for me, with renting, it's very easy. My unrecoverable cost is straight up my rental expense at the end of the year. And then when it now comes to owning a property, this is where some variations come into it, because these costs are not easily identifiable. But however, this now leads me to introduce the concept called the 5% rule. So with this 5% rule, it's generally said that per annum, if you're a property owner or a homeowner, 5% of the home value is the cost of maintaining this house, or is the unrecoverable cost. This 5% is broken down as follows. Firstly, there's 1% which comes in from the property taxes that you will need to pay to the government, and the other 1% comes in onto the maintenance, and then 3% is now attributable to the cost of capital, or the cost of the debt that you've acquired, which is the mortgage that you got. So the interest rates, of course, they vary depending on maybe your credit scores, so many assumptions, but for the purposes of this video, I'll just generalize it. And so what that means, that simply put in other terms, is on a £300,000 property, your unrecoverable cost at the end of the year is about £15,000. And then, so which means if someone can be able to rent a house at a much lower amount a house which is worth £300,000 at a lesser amount than £15,000, then it makes more sense for them to be renting rather than owning a house. This is of course with the assumption that we are purely making this decision on quantitative factors and excluding all the qualitative factors we discussed at the beginning of the video. And then another point that we needed to bring out into this assumption or into this analysis of the decision was, what's the cost of the equity, or what's the opportunity cost that you may have incurred for you to actually go on and buy a property, which means you have had to forego certain other investments. So what other investments could one have done with that £30,000? And this is still the assumption using our £300,000 house. It is said that the real return that has been generated like on the global real estate market was about 3% from like the 1900s. And then we look again at the global stock market on what the real return has been from the 1900s, again factoring in things like 0.62%. Now this is pre-tax, but even if it's after tax, the rate is definitely a little bit higher than the 3% that you generate from real estate. It may make more sense for someone who doesn't have that much of a capital injection to invest their money in the stock market. But again, maybe we'll need to talk about investing in the stock market in a much safer way, like in a different video. Maybe start a business, well, high risk, but it could potentially be even a higher return than buying a house. I'm not saying that people should not buy houses. If you have the money for it, please go for it. This is just my own personal view on how I look at things, making the logical sense out of the data and information available to me. So it does not necessarily mean that I will not invest in the property market, but as far as London goes, I feel like that's a much difficult market to invest in. It requires very, very large capital for you to buy a house. And then I even went on further to look at, okay, what's my affordability criteria? Like, I'm just dismissing myself here to say I can't afford it. What if I was to go to a bank? How much are they really willing to lend? So there I went onto the mortgage calculators, and guess what? On my own accounting salary and the amount of money that I'm saving, the banks are going to only lend me about £150,000 to £205,000, which will not be enough to buy a house. The minimum reasonable property I think you can get is about £300,000. So if they are willing to lend me up until £205,000 and I want to buy a £300,000 house, it means that I need to raise about £95,000 in a deposit. Oh my god. Oh my god, I feel like London is not meant for people like me. London is not for me, to be honest. There's no way I would raise that much money. And okay, maybe let's say a 250,000 at least house. If I was to buy a 250,000 house, it still means that I need to raise about £45,000. And for you to raise that much money, it takes a lot of time. So in short, this decision of buying a house or wanting to invest into a home, personally, if it's in London, it will not make any fun. I'll be definitely tying up funds. So if I am to invest in the property market, it needs to be maybe in another town, which is not London, or in another country. But at this point, I haven't even decided where I want to be in the next 5 years, which place I want to stay. So it's just starting out in your career. If you haven't figured things out, like, don't worry, just take your time. Do not rush to buy a property if you are not yet settled and if you are not yet ready. I think you need to have a solid financial standing. It's one of the most biggest decisions that you need to make financially in everyone's life, I think. So that is it for me, guys, today. And again I say this is not meant to discourage anyone. If you can afford to buy a house, please buy a house in London. Look at it from your own personal circumstances and not make an emotional decision to say, I just want to be a homeowner. It may not always be for everyone. That's it from me. I love you a lot. Thank you so much. Subscribe to my channel. Share this video if you found this useful. Leave out your comments below. I just want to know your thoughts on this particular subject because it's a very controversial one. I really was dreading shooting this video. I thought about it. Should I do it? Should I not? Will I make people angry? But anyway, it's here. It's part of being a YouTuber, I guess. You just have to. So thank you guys so much for watching, share, comment, and I'll see you in the next